10 minutes into my divorce trial, my wife laughed out loud in a packed courtroom. She stopped laughing when the judge read her own documents back to her. 10 minutes into my divorce trial, my wife laughed out loud in a packed courtroom, not nervously, not by accident. Full-throated, head tilted back, the kind of laugh that fills marble halls and makes gallery heads turn. Camille had always understood the power of a room. She understood it even more when she believed she had already won it. She stood at the petitioner's table in a cream suit that cost more than my first month's rent in graduate school. One hand resting on a stack of exhibits, turning slowly toward Judge Howard Aldridge, as if she were the only intelligent person present and was graciously tolerating everyone else's presence. She smiled with the confidence of a woman who had spent 10 years watching me work 18-hour days and had concluded, somewhere along the way, that the work was hers too, by proximity, by marriage, by the simple fact of having been there while I built it. She demanded half my company, not half of what we had built together, because we hadn't built it together. She demanded half of a fintech platform I had coded on a second-hand laptop in a one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta while she was still in law school, half of a business valued by the financial press at $14 million, and half of the irrevocable trust my late father had assembled from 30 years of teaching high school economics and refusing to spend money on things that didn't compound. Behind her, in the front row of the gallery, sat my mother and my younger brother Marcus. They were dressed like witnesses at a coronation. My mother, Brenda, wore a cream blouse and her good pearl earrings. Marcus sat beside her with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has been waiting a long time for his older brother's stumble. His wife Tasha was beside him, arms folded, chin raised, wearing the expression of someone who has already begun spending money they haven't received yet. My own blood, 3 rows behind the woman who was trying to dismantle my life in open court, and the anticipation on their faces was not even remotely disguised. They thought I would fold. They had thought that my entire life. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, drew out a sealed brown envelope, and passed it to my attorney. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "I'd ask the court to take another look." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My attorney, Elias Whitmore, 63 years old, silver at the temples, 31 years of practice, the kind of man who speaks slowly because he is always thinking 3 moves ahead, rose from his seat with the unhurried grace of someone who has watched impatient people lose for 3 decades. He took the envelope and approached the bench. Across the aisle, Camille laughed again. Marcus put his fist to his mouth to cover a smirk. Camille's attorney, a litigator named Priya Shah, who charged $800 an hour and wore it, stood before the envelope reached the bailiff. "Your Honor, if opposing counsel is attempting a last-minute submission designed to circumvent the disclosure schedule." Judge Aldridge lifted one hand. She stopped. That was the thing about Judge Howard Aldridge. He was 67, the color of old mahogany, and had been on the Fulton County bench long enough to have watched every variety of financial fraud disguised as domestic dispute pass through his courtroom. He had the unhurried patience of a man who had already seen the ending of this kind of story many times. "I'll decide what I review," he said. His voice landed like a foot on gravel. The bailiff passed him the envelope. He slid it open. He read. The courtroom went so still I could hear the building's ventilation system humming 3 floors above us. 3 minutes in a courtroom is an eternity. Camille stopped moving. Her pen slowed. Her attorney leaned forward. My mother's expression shifted. That particular flicker of recalibration that comes when a room stops following the script you rehearsed. Judge Aldridge removed his glasses, read 1 page again, then went back to the certified filing clipped at the back. Then he looked up. He did not laugh the way Camille had laughed. Performative, victorious. He made a short, low sound of incredulity, the sound of a man who has encountered arrogance so reckless it reads as comedy. Camille went pale for the first time all morning. Judge Aldridge leaned toward his microphone. "Counselor," he said, drawing the word out with the precision of a surgeon making an incision, "do you wish to maintain this financial disclosure under penalty of perjury?" Perjury. That word had lived in my mind for months, since Thanksgiving, since the exact moment I stopped being a husband and started being prey. I had always been the one in my family who fixed things. My name is Vincent Carter. I'm 38 years old. I built a financial technology company called Bridgeline that helps low-income families access microloans, build credit histories, and avoid predatory lending. I started it in 2017 with code I wrote myself on a laptop I bought secondhand for $200 in a one-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta while working a consulting day job that paid just enough to keep the lights on. By the time the divorce was filed, Bridgeline had completed its Series A, secured venture backing from 2 of the top firms in fintech, and been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal. For a black founder in financial technology, this was not just professional success. It was a statistical argument against every obstacle that category implies. Camille was a family law attorney. We had met at a legal tech conference in 2015, married in 2017, and for the first 3 years of the marriage, things were, if not warm, functional. She was smart, controlled, and interesting in the way that competitive people are interesting. Always performing, always positioning, always aware of the room. The company grew. Our life grew around it. And somewhere in that growth, I noticed a a change in how Camille looked at Bridgeline. Less like a thing I had built and more like a thing we were entitled to. She began attending investor dinners uninvited and correcting my explanations of our own product. She introduced herself at industry events as co-founder in conversations where I wasn't present. I heard about it secondhand from 2 different board members who assumed I'd sanctioned it. When I raised it gently one evening, she said I was threatened by her legal expertise, and the conversation ended there the way all our conversations ended, in silence that cost me more energy than the argument would have. My mother loved her. That was the red flag I ignored longest. Brenda Carter has always been more impressed by presentation than by substance. She raised 2 sons, worked as a medical billing specialist for 26 years, and spent most of those years comparing us to people who didn't have our disadvantages. She loved the idea of Camille, the attorney daughter-in-law, the sharp woman in the good suit, more than she ever examined what Camille actually was. Marcus, my brother, resented my success in the specific, corrosive way of people who believe proximity to achievement should transfer automatically. He had tried 4 businesses and exited each one inside 18 months. His wife Tasha worked in real estate and had a gift for spending money generated by other people's labor. They were always one crisis away from asking me for something and always dressed as if they weren't. I had bailed Marcus out twice, written a check both times and never mentioned it again. That was the deal I had negotiated with myself. Be generous, ask nothing, hold no grudge. What I did not understand, what Thanksgiving finally taught me, was that generosity, interpreted by certain people, is not kindness. It is evidence that you can be taken from. I drove to my mother's house that November with exhaustion and an offering. The previous 96 hours had been spent closing Bridgeline Series A inside a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and ambition. I had slept a combined 11 hours over 4 days. My eyes felt like they'd been sandblasted, but the round had closed. The valuation was public, and some stubborn, probably irrational part of me wanted to sit at my mother's table and hear someone who shared my blood say, "I'm proud of you." I parked in her suburban driveway and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. Just survived dinner, I told myself. The house was warm and loud. Turkey, greens, football from the back room. Marcus near the fireplace with a bourbon he was holding like a prop, talking at Tasha about markets he didn't understand with the authority of a man who has never been corrected to his face. Camille was at the center of it, that practiced half-smile deployed on my mother, working the room like she always did, effortless, strategic, expert. Nobody moved to greet me. My mother emerged from the kitchen with a dish towel. "You're late," she said. "I came from the office." I set down the wine I'd brought. "The round closed this morning." She made the face she made when I mentioned work, as if the office were a vanity project rather than the thing funding her home repairs. "What round?" Marcus asked from across the room. "Series A, for Bridgeline." Tasha looked up from her phone, smiled without warmth. Marcus took a sip of bourbon. "Must be nice," he said. "Having people fall over themselves to hand money to a diversity hire. Silicon Valley loves a headline." He said it lightly. He always did. Plausible deniability was Marcus's native language. I looked at Camille. She said nothing. She did not tell him he was wrong. Did not mention the 2 years of 18-hour days. Did not push back on the implication that what I had built was given to me. She looked faintly amused. My mother came fully into the room. "Stop standing there bragging about the app, Vincent. Fix yourself a plate and make sure Camille has enough of the greens. She mentioned she's been working hard this week." The room chuckled. I went to the kitchen, not because they were right, because keeping the peace had always felt like it cost less than war. I was wrong about the math. Steam on the windows. Pots crowded the stove. I started filling a plate and reached for the trash bag to take it outside. I needed 60 seconds of cold air to reset. That was when I saw the phone. Camille's iPhone lay face up on the kitchen island beside the fruit bowl, screen still lit from a new message. I was not a man who went through his wife's phone. I had never considered it. That kind of vigilance had always seemed like a self-inflicted sentence to me. If trust required constant surveillance, it had already died. But the message was there, in plain view, large text, from Derek. "The escrow for our place cleared. Did you move the rest from the joint account?" I stood very still. "Our place, the joint account." I read it again, a third time. The way you reread something your brain refuses to process because the translation is too expensive. Derek Hines, my college roommate, best man at my wedding, the man who gave a speech at our reception about loyalty and brotherhood that still lived in my head as one of the finest things anyone had ever said about me publicly. My wife was not merely sleeping with him. She was buying property with him, with my money. The trash bag hit the floor. I did not scream, did not pick up the phone and walk it into the living room, did not do any of the things adrenaline was suggesting with some urgency. Something much more dangerous happened instead. I got quiet, the particular quiet that people mistake for surrender because they've never been on the other side of it. I set my fingertips on the counter and breathed until my pulse slowed to something manageable. The room tilted, steadied, tilted again. I needed to know the shape of this, so I moved toward the back hallway rather than the living room. My mother's house had a pantry tucked behind the breakfast nook, a narrow room she used for canned goods, holiday dishes, and anything else she wanted stored but close. As I stepped into the hallway, voices came through the folding door. Camille, Mark. Marcus, my mother. Low, urgent, familiar. I stopped with my back to the wall. The firm is getting impatient, Marcus was saying. Tasha maxed the business card covering the shortfall, and they're threatening collections. Lower your voice, my mother whispered. Camille's reply came smooth and entirely unbothered. I told you both. I have it handled. I closed my eyes. How? Brenda demanded. I am not watching you lose everything because your husband is in love with his app. My mother said your husband the way you refer to a stranger. Bridgeline's valuation just went public, Camille said. The round closed today. He's worth considerably more than he realizes. I've been drafting for months. Drafting what? Marcus asked. A post-nuptial agreement, asset restructuring, liability protection. He'll sign it. I heard my own heartbeat in the soles of my feet. Camille's voice dropped lower, confident in the privacy of the pantry, confident that the people listening had already chosen sides. He's exhausted, emotionally isolated, and genuinely believes I'm his most reliable ally. I'm going to present this as protection from investor litigation, that the company's visibility creates personal exposure. He won't understand half the language, and he trusts me enough not to hire a second reader. And you get? Marcus said. She laughed, softly. Everything. My mother made a sound of approval. Once it's executed, Camille continued, I file. We argue abandonment of marital duties, emotional withdrawal, prioritizing business over partnership. Brenda, she said my mother's name with the casualness of a lieutenant addressing a resource. If needed, you testify to the pattern. Marcus, too. I'll say whatever needs saying, my mother replied. He's always thought he was too good for this family. I had spent 38 years trying to be good enough for this family. Derek found a property we both love, Camille added, casual as weather. Once the settlement lands, it all resolves quietly. Everybody wins. Everybody, not me. I backed away from the door in silence, through the kitchen, through the mudroom, out the back into November air so cold it hit like a palm. I walked to my car, got inside, and locked the doors. My hands were not shaking. That was the first thing I noticed. Not because I was calm, because grief makes you heavy, and betrayal, real betrayal, the kind built over months by people with your phone number, makes you precise. I sat in the dark and let the shape of it fully assemble. Then I pulled out my phone and called Elias. He answered on the second ring. Whitmore, Elias. One beat of silence. He heard what was in my voice. What happened? I looked through the windshield at the lit windows of my mother's house, at the shadows moving through the kitchen, at my family sitting down to eat a dinner I had partially financed at a table I had partly furnished, celebrating a plan to take everything I had made. I need to build a trap, I said, and I need them to spring it themselves. By midnight, I was in Elias's back office, not the conference room with the good coffee and the tasteful art, the real room, the one with the files on every wall and the yellow legal pads and the floor lamp that cast everything in serious amber light. I told him everything. Derek's message, the condo, the pantry, my mother's promise to lie under oath, the post-nup, Marcus's debt, Tasha's pressure. Elias listened with his hands folded and said almost nothing. When I finished, he leaned back. I always knew Camille was ambitious, he said. I did not know she was reckless. He had encountered her at 2 firm events over the years. He knew precisely how she operated. Sharpest person in the room, most strategic thinker at the table, so comfortable with her own intelligence that she had stopped accounting for the intelligence of others. She'll come in soft, he said. Concerned partner, asset protection, corporate exposure. She'll choose a moment when you're most depleted. She'll position herself as your only safe harbor. Can she claim the company? Not if the trust is structured correctly. My father, a high school economics teacher who drove a 2003 Camry and fixed everything himself and trusted no system that rewarded confidence over competence. He had died 18 months earlier, of a heart that had simply worn itself out from working too hard for too long. Before he went, he built an irrevocable trust from what he had saved and made sure I understood every word of the document. Your wife is very smart, he'd said from his hospital bed, voice thin, eyes clear. Smart women married to men who build things have a habit of deciding the building was a collaboration. I had thought he was being uncharitable. He was being a prophet. Elias picked up his legal pad. We don't stop her, he said. I looked up. We let her draft the agreement. Let her present it. Let her believe she's walking you into a financial execution. He tapped his pen. Then we moved the company first. The room went still. Not the operations. The ownership. Before you sign a single thing, he explained it. The transfer of founder shares and intellectual property into the irrevocable trust before the post-nup was executed. If the trust language was clean, Camille would do the heavy lifting herself. Any competent family attorney drafting an asset separation agreement would exempt trust holdings to appear balanced. She'd build the wall around my company with her own hands and think she was building a cage. She exempts the trust herself, I said slowly. Of course she does. She doesn't want you claiming her assets through the trust either. Standard language. She'll write it in and think she's being clever. Elias's mouth moved slightly. She'll have locked herself out and you in. We worked until 2:40 a.m. Not only on the transfer, on everything. The condo, the accounts, Derek. Men who commit one betrayal rarely stop at one, Elias said. The affair is usually the most visible symptom of a much larger pattern. He was right. Men like Derek, charming, opportunistic, accustomed to shortcuts, didn't just happen into financial arrangements. They built them. The next weeks required a discipline I had not known I possessed. I did not confront Camille. I did not call Derek. I did not say a word to Marcus or my mother. I came home from Thanksgiving late, slid into bed beside my wife, lay with the ceiling 6 inches above my face, and breathed slowly until the alarm went off. Camille made her move on a Tuesday in January. Rain on the windows, candles on the dining table, soft music, the expensive takeout I liked, her hand on my arm at the door, her face arranged into careful concern. "You look exhausted," she said. I let myself sag. "I'm fine. You're not fine." She guided me to the sofa, poured wine, rubbed my shoulders with the practiced attentiveness of someone who understands that tenderness is a tool. "The company is exploding. The press is watching. Investors are circling. That level of visibility creates real legal exposure, Vincent." She used my name the way sedatives are administered, precisely, in the right dose. I let my voice come out thin. "What kind of exposure?" She crossed to her briefcase, returned with a clipped stack of documents and placed them in my lap. The post-nuptial agreement, 12 pages. Language so dense it was designed to overwhelm anyone who mistook complexity for authority. Asset separation, liability shielding, protective allocation of interests, stewardship clauses, spousal fiduciary frameworks. She sat close, turned her body toward mine. "This separates exposures. If someone sues the company, our home, our savings, my practice, everything stays insulated." "Our?" I asked softly. She touched my wrist. "Of course, ours." Then, smoothly, the pivot. "Your founder shares are the most exposed asset. I've structured them under a joint protective framework that gives me standing to defend them in a challenge scenario." What it actually gave her was a devastating claim to them in a divorce proceeding. Her own assets were separated with surgical precision. Present holdings, future earnings, any investment income, every inch of her estate perfectly insulated. She had written herself freedom and me a mortgage on my own life. I let my jaw loosen, let tears gather at the corners of my eyes. She pulled me toward her, kissed my temple, spoke softly into my hair. "You don't need to understand every clause. That's what you have me for. There is no drug quite like the belief, inside a certain kind of person, that they have successfully deceived someone they have underestimated." I felt it in the way her shoulders relaxed. "Take tonight," she said. "Read it in the morning, but the sooner we execute, the safer we are." The moment she stepped into the bathroom, I wiped my eyes dry, took the documents to my office, and scanned every page into the encrypted system Elias had set up for me. 3 mornings later, before sunrise, Elias and a trust attorney were waiting for me in a conference room above Bridgeline's offices. I signed for 2 hours. Share transfers, IP assignments, updated capitalization tables, corporate resolutions authorizing the movement of every core asset into my father's irrevocable trust. By 8:58 a.m., the filing confirmation was on screen. The company was no longer held in my personal name. Patents, codebase, algorithms, controlling interest, all held by the trust. I sat back and let out a breath I had been holding since November. "Legally sealed," the trust attorney said. "Irrevocable, filed, cross-referenced, and time-stamped." Elias nodded. "Now let her bring you the rope." 2 weeks later, I signed Camille's post-nuptial agreement. I did it with her watching, my mother present, Marcus and Tasha on the couch with their barely suppressed satisfaction. Camille had arranged it ceremonially. Champagne, good glasses, the lighting adjusted to something warm and celebratory. "For your protection," she said as I picked up the pen. "Take your time," my mother urged. "He's lucky you understand this world," Marcus said. I signed every page, every initial line, every clause. Camille watched with the serenity of a woman who had just completed a masterpiece. When I handed it back, she kissed my cheek in front of all of them. They toasted, they drank. They congratulated themselves on a plan so perfectly executed, they couldn't imagine it had already been turned inside out. Then Marcus came to my office. I was reviewing revenue projections when my assistant Pamela's voice rose in the corridor, and then the door opened and Marcus walked in without knocking, in a polo shirt and sunglasses hooked at the collar, looking around at the floor-to-ceiling windows with that particular expression of entitlement that passes for appreciation in men who have never earned what they survey. He dropped into the chair opposite my desk. "Business," he said. "Of course." He laid it out, a consulting retainer, strategic advisory, growth positioning, executive alignment, words he'd assembled from LinkedIn and delivered with the confidence of someone who had confused vocabulary for expertise. $50,000, family rate, and then the squeeze. "Look, Mama's worried. Tasha and I are worried. Everybody thinks you've gotten too big in your head, too money-focused, too cold to the people who stood by you." He gestured at my office. "This would go a long way towards smoothing things over." There it was, the oldest extortion in the world. "You owe us for surviving without us." I looked at him for a long moment. "Fine," I said. He blinked. "Compliance is strict here," I said, my voice easy. "Venture backing means audits. I'll need your entity information, routing number, account number, business name." Greed is a solvent. It dissolved his caution in about 4 seconds. He pulled a business card from his wallet, scribbled on the back, and slid it across. "Meridian Advisory Group, LLC." Below it, in blue ink, the banking details. I wrote him a check for $50,000 for services that would never be rendered. He took it with a handshake and a smile and left. The moment his footsteps faded, the door to my adjoining conference room opened and Elias stepped out. He had been listening the entire time. I handed him the card. He looked at the account number and made a sound of quiet satisfaction. Track everything, I said. David Keller, forensic accountant, 15 years with federal auditors before going private, the man Elias called the most boring and effective person I know, began following the money the following Monday. What he found was not petty. Julian's affair had been funded partly through marital accounts, but the deeper architecture was something else. Under-the-table payments from Camille's firm clients, routed through shell companies as fake advisory fees, distributed partially offshore and partially returned as clean-looking income. Meridian Advisory Group was in the middle of it. Derek Hines was a secondary node. The whole structure was held together by one document at the bottom. David put the state filing on the screen. Articles of incorporation, managing authority, registered agent, primary responsible party. The name was not Camille's, not Derek's, not Marcus's. It was Brenda Elaine Carter, my mother. I looked at her signature at the bottom of the page for a long time. She had signed it thinking she was helping. Marcus would have brought papers. Camille would have smiled and explained it gently, quickly, in the language of being useful. And Brenda, who had always needed to matter to the people she admired, would have signed because the people asking her were people who told her she was important. They had used her as a shield. If the structure collapsed, her name was the face attached to the fraud. We can go to federal authorities now, David said. Elias looked at me. No, I said. Let him walk into court first. The morning of the trial, I wore charcoal. Simple. Nothing that competed. Camille dressed like she was announcing something. The laugh, the envelope, the room going silent. Judge Aldridge read through the supplemental documents with the patience of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at. You drafted this post-nuptial agreement yourself? He asked Camille. Yes, Your Honor. I'm quite familiar with the language. Then you'll recognize Section 4. He read it into the record. Any and all assets held within a pre-existing irrevocable trust belonging to either party shall remain separate and exempt from marital division, regardless of subsequent appreciation, reinvestment, or change in character. Camille straightened. She thought this was going her way. She had written that language herself to protect her own assets. We're not contesting the trust, she said. Only the company. According to the supplemental filing submitted this morning, Judge Aldridge said, lifting the SEC documents, the respondent transferred 100% of his founder equity, intellectual property, and controlling interest in the company into the irrevocable trust, time-stamped 2 hours before you executed this agreement. Camille's face drained. Mr. Carter holds no founder shares in his personal name, no patent interests, no direct equity. The company is entirely trust-held. Priya Shah rose. Your Honor, we object. Sit down, he said, not unkindly, just finally. He looked at Camille. The language exempting trust assets was written by you, counselor. Under the document you drafted, which your client signed voluntarily, you have waived any future claim to trust assets in all their forms. That wasn't the intent, she started. The intent, Judge Aldridge said, with the weariness of a man who has heard this argument in 100 forms, is irrelevant when the language is unambiguous and the drafter is a licensed attorney. The room was absolutely still. You get nothing, he said. Then Elias stood. He moved through it without theater. The wire transfers, the condo escrow, beneficiary, Derek Hines, occupant and co-purchaser, the shell company, the fake consulting invoices, the offshore routing, the deposition, taken 3 weeks before trial, in which Camille had testified under oath that she held no outside financial interests, no beneficial stake in any LLC or consulting entity, and no undeclared assets of any kind. Every one of those statements. False. Perjury, Elias said. Concealment, dissipation of marital assets, tax evasion through a fraudulent entity. Camille sat rigid and motionless, the way structures go still right before collapse. Marcus moved for the back doors. Judge Aldridge didn't look up. Nobody leaves. The bailiff stepped in front of the exit. Marcus stopped, turned, and found his seat again like a boy sent to the corner. Tasha began crying. Camille's attorney leaned away from her. Not dramatically, just the small, instinctive repositioning of someone who has realized they've been standing too close to a fire. My mother stood. You did this, she said, her voice cracking. You are destroying your family over money. I turned in my seat. For 38 years, that woman's anger had moved through me like weather through an unlatched window. I had arranged my entire emotional life around managing it, preempting it, apologizing for provoking it. I stood and walked to the gallery railing. I held out a single document, the Meridian entity filing, her name at the bottom. She took it, read the bottom. Her eyes moved slowly, then stopped. Tasha said it was just paperwork, she said. Marcus said they needed someone whose name could absorb the liability, I said. Her mouth worked. If the IRS follows the filing, I said quietly, your signature is what they follow first. The paper shook in her hands. I watched her look from the document to Camille, to Marcus, searching for rescue that wasn't there. Camille stared at the table. Marcus studied his shoes. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother understand that the people she had chosen over me had only ever chosen her in return for her usefulness. The paper slipped from her fingers. She sat down. Judge Judge Aldridge struck his gavel once. These proceedings are suspended pending referral of the relevant materials to the appropriate authorities. Court is adjourned. He rose and left. No music, no monologue, just a man in a black robe deciding he had seen enough. In the hallway, the family finished coming apart. Marcus grabbed Camille by the arm. You said there was no paper trail. You said it was airtight. She shook him off. I didn't know he'd moved the company. You didn't know? Tasha screamed. Priya Shah was already on her phone, walking quickly in the other direction. Derek, I was told later, received a call from his own attorney that same afternoon. The offshore accounts had been flagged. The condo was seized within the month. My mother came toward me in the hallway. She caught my sleeve with both hands. Her eyes were full, not the practiced tears she deployed at family dinners when she wanted compliance, but something rawer and more frightened. Vincent, she said, please, tell your lawyer to help me. I didn't understand what I was signing. You know me. You know I didn't. I looked at her hands on my arm. These were the hands that had fed me and raised me and pointed at me in a courtroom. I peeled her fingers off, gently, one at a time. You chose your family at Thanksgiving, I said. Her face crumpled. Enjoy the harvest. I turned and walked. Elias fell into step beside me without a word. Camille was disbarred within the year. The state bar moved with efficiency once the deposition transcript and offshore records reached the ethics panel. Her firm removed her name from the directory before the month was out. Federal charges followed: wire fraud, tax evasion, perjury, asset concealment. Marcus pled to a lesser charge in exchange for cooperation. The cooperation didn't save him much. Tasha filed for divorce. The business, the cards, the lifestyle, all of it dissolved. Derek fled to a rental in Savannah and posted wellness content for 6 months before the federal subpoena found him there. My mother took a plea. To do it, she liquidated everything. The house went. The retirement account shrank to almost nothing. She moved into a subsidized apartment 20 minutes from where she had raised us. People asked if I felt guilty. I felt relieved. Relieved to stop financing chaos and calling it loyalty. Relieved to stop absorbing humiliation as the price of access to people who shared my last name. Bridgeline went public 14 months after the trial. The first morning I stood on the balcony of our New York headquarters. The wind came cold and clean between the buildings, and I just let myself feel the absence. No Camille, no Derek, no Brenda, no Marcus, no constant performance of smallness to make other people comfortable with my size. Elias joined me with a cup of black coffee. He looked at the city for a while. Your father would have liked this view, he said. I couldn't speak for a moment. Yes, I said. He would have. The bell rang. Not beautiful, not cinematic, just decisive. I thought of my father at the kitchen table, teaching me compound interest on the back of junk mail. I thought of the check I wrote Marcus without being thanked. I thought of every room I had managed and every dinner I had survived and every time I had been told my success was coincidental. I thought of a pantry in November and voices that did not know they were being heard, and the moment grief became precision. The stock climbed, then climbed again. That evening, alone on a rooftop terrace above the city, a glass of champagne warming in my hand, I let the silence sit. They had mistaken my endurance for weakness, my silence for stupidity, my patience for surrender. They had believed I would keep serving the table while they carved me up and called it family. What they did not understand, what a certain kind of person never understands about the people they underestimate, is that the quiet ones are not quiet because they have nothing to say. They are quiet because they are building something you cannot see yet, and when it is ready, it speaks for itself.